Hi guys, thanks for joining a new episode of Elevenses. My name is Samia and I work with agencies in the UK team.
Hi guys, my name is Owen and I also work on the UK agency team.
So today is the third and last part of our expert series on smart solutions. If you haven't listened to the first two, make sure you do after this. So the first one was focused on smart bidding, and the second one last week was a great one on smart creatives as well. So Clodagh walked us through why you should be implementing smart creatives to help your advertisers meet their goals. And today we're going to focus on best practices for smart creatives in terms of implementation and also optimization. So in terms of the agenda, is quite a straightforward one. We're going to start with responsive search ads best practices. Then we're going to move on to responsive display ads, then dynamic search ads, and then we're going to wrap up with our key takeaways for our smart solutions series. Now, before we kick off with the nitty-gritty of responsive search ads, I just want to call out something here that I think is the most important thing with the entire move to responsive ads. It is a shift in terms of how you create ads because we're moving to asset-based creatives. And so one thing to keep in mind is your ads are only ever going to be as good as the combination of your assets. So when you're creating your ads, just focus on the quality and the variety of your assets. That's the one main thing for me. Now, for responsive search ads, I guess looking at how they work, you're combining a bunch of elements. You can have up to 3 headlines and 3 description lines. So main thing to keep in mind here is you want to your headlines are going to show next to each other. So you don't want them to repeat the same thing. And so providing, I guess, where to start, you want to go with 5 distinct headlines, 2 distinct descriptions. And then once that's done, you go back and add a couple more headlines and focus on your keywords. So to make it a bit easier for you, we compiled quite an exhaustive list of things to think about when you're creating your headlines and your descriptions. I won't go through all of them, but main thing here to keep in mind is think of what you're selling and think of your customer, what they're going to be searching for, and try to include as many relevant things as possible for them. So what are your products? What are your services? What do you want them to do? What are you asking them to do? What kind of certifications or accreditations do you have? What kind of inventory? Do you have? What's special about your selection, for example? What is your pricing? Do you have any fees they need to be aware of, or any discounts, incentives, any guarantees? How do you ship? So there's a huge amount of things you could be including there. Just keep that in mind when you're writing your ads. Now, ideally, you want to get to a stage where you have at least 1 responsive search ad for each ad group. It is difficult at the start, so we do recommend starting with your highest traffic campaigns, so minimum 1,000 clicks per month. But if it's a smaller account, then that's a bit more irrelevant. And then go with your non-branded campaigns because you have a higher chance of matching more queries. Another key thing to keep in mind here is when you're looking at scaling adoption across the account, the recommendations tab in the AdWords UI does allow you to do that very quickly in a couple of clicks. So look at that. And if you do have a Google Account Manager, ask them about our Google Ad Copy Specialist service, which can be extremely helpful in driving adoption at scale for RSAs. Now, there is an element of automation to responsive search ads, but there's also a lot of control. So one, you control your assets because you're the one that's providing them. And then if your advertiser has something that they absolutely need to show, so for example, if regulation requires to show a disclaimer, then there's a great pinning feature which allows you to decide to show a specific element either in the headline or the description line. So make sure you use that if it's necessary. If it's not necessary, we don't recommend using it because it does reduce the amount of combinations that are eligible to show and kind of, frankly defeats the purpose of having responsive search ads in the first place. So whilst you're creating your ads, and thinking how great a job you're doing, there's a really handy feature within the Google Ads UI, which allows you to get real-time feedback on your headlines and your description lines. So it's the ad strength tool. It will give you indications of strength ranging from poor to excellent. You want to aim for good or higher always. So that's while whilst you're creating your ads, it will also give you tips in terms of what to do. So adding more headlines or adding more description lines or making your description lines more unique and distinct. But once you've published your ads, you can also add the ad strength column on the reporting tab to keep an eye on the ad strength and keep optimizing to the indications. Now you've created your ads, you've followed all the best practices. So how do you evaluate their performance, and how do you make sure that they are driving the impact that you're looking for? So first of all, something I really want to emphasize here is remember the end goal. The end goal of implementing RSAs is to drive more queries, to match more queries and to be more relevant and ensure that you're driving your advertising goals. So generally, what you're looking to do is drive more traffic or drive more sales. So there's absolutely no reason to be looking at click-through rates or conversion rates. You really want to be focusing on things like impressions, clicks, and conversions. Why? Because I'll give you an example. If an ad, if an RSA has a lower click-through rate, it still allows you to enter new auctions, drive incremental impressions, incremental clicks, and incremental conversions. Just because it has a lower click-through rate doesn't mean that it's performing poorly. So in that case, what you want to do is just try to add more headlines or description lines that speak to what your conversion goals are. For example, ask people to sign up, to make bookings, etc. Don't just discard it and think that it's not performing well because it has lower click-through rates. So now that that's clear, we're going to look at the different elements you have in terms of measurement and reporting. So the first report you have is the ad level reporting. So that shows your normal reporting metrics that are available. So impressions, clicks, your cost, your click-through rates, etc. And that's for the combinations that are shown, so the entire ad. Just remember one thing here, don't compare your responsive search ads to your ETAs. And if you really want to compare their performance, do a proper A/B test using your drafts and experiment tool. Don't just compare it in this report. That's not a good way of comparing them. Next report we have is the asset level reporting. It shows the reporting on each individual text asset, so the headlines and the description lines separately. And this only shows the impression, so it's more of a measure of how good your asset is and therefore how often it's shown. And later on, we'll be adding a status and a performance column, so you'll know when it's still in the learning phase and how well it's performing. And finally, there's the combinations report. That's more of an informational report rather than an actionable report, and it just shows you the different combinations that are shown and how many impressions they get. Obviously, it's not an exhaustive list of combinations because there's a huge amount of combinations that can be created out of your assets. So that's it for responsive search ads. Now we're going to move on to responsive display ads. As Claudia called out last week, RDAs are extremely important and they're crucial because they allow you to increase your reach, they allow you to access new inventory and more inventory, and they allow you to improve the performance of your display campaigns. So luckily, though, in terms of implementation, it's quite similar to responsive search ads. You just gather all your assets and provide them to us. And then the machine learning does the assembly to serve the best combinations to each user based on the context. Now, for responsive display ads and display ads in general, there's a visual element to it, of course, which makes the image ads that you provide extremely crucial to the performance of your ads. So we're just going to look at the creative best practices here quickly for images. As a rule of thumb, or terms of just general common sense, you want to go with very high quality images, and that means avoiding anything that's skewed, blurry, mirrored, etc. Avoid borders and strong filters as well. You want to go with things that look natural. So images that focus on your product and your service as well. You don't need to overlay any logos, text, or buttons on your images, because you're providing those separately and it's going to be combined. So that hinders the capability of combination that the machine learning is going to be doing. And also, if you have a dynamic feed, make sure you do include that and opt it in to be able to serve the right product to the right user. Finally, in terms of controls, there's a couple of things again, it's automated, but there's a huge amount of things you could be doing to really control the look and feel of your creatives and make sure they're in line with your brand. You can opt in or opt out of specific formats like native ads, and you can input your primary and secondary colors to match your brand for every single ad. So that's it in terms of creative best practices. And now I'm going to pass on to Owen, who's going to go into the implementation best practices for responsive display ads.
Cool. Thanks, Phil. So in terms of implementation best practices, the first thing to kind of remember is that you don't need to reinvent the wheel here. So in terms of your image assets and your short headline, you can use content from your existing ads that have performed well in the past. On the image asset side of things, you want to just focus on those with the most impressions and remember to avoid anything that is using text. For your long headline, you want to get people interested. So write a longer editorial style, 70 to 90 character headline. It basically just provides the highest visibility when rendered natively in publisher's content. And again, you want to avoid copying the text from the short headline. So you want to keep them distinctive as per the RSAs. You should also constantly be testing new creatives. So this should be changed every 4 to 6 weeks. Just remember that you shouldn't change them too often in the first 2 to 4 weeks, as it's during the learning period. Also, as ever, make sure that you're using RDAs in combination with smart bidding for the best results. In terms of understanding how the performance is going, you have a couple of reports at your disposal here. So you have the ad level report, which lets you look at the standard performance metrics and also the aggregate metrics for all of your ad combinations, showing the headlines and each description entered for each RDA. You also have your asset report to understand when you need to replace poorly performing assets, and on the right-hand side, it'll give you an idea as to what the performance looks like. And it's important to remember that these assets are measured according to the volume of conversions, the conversion rate, and the CPA per impression per asset. You also have the top combination report, which helps you understand which assets are performing best together so you can then further optimize. In terms of real-time feedback, there is a scorecard also available, similar to the responsive search ads. So this is looking at your ad strength, and it measures the quantity and diversity of assets and provides ad setup and next steps. You can also look at this proactively before publishing your assets and to basically see where you sit in terms of the performance of the ad. So moving on from RSAs to, last but not least, the DSAs. So Clodagh, again, last week gave you examples as to why you should be using this format and what it's good for. Now we're going to have a look at more on the implementation side of things and the options available within the solution itself. So for those of you who are just getting started using dynamic search ads, it's important to note that you want to, if you're starting off, separate your regular search campaigns from your DSA campaigns. So the reason for this is because you're likely going to have a different budget. There's going to be different bidding in place and different targeting options. So for example, in your standard search campaign, you might have your standard ad group looking at denim, and your keywords are targeting the various types of denim that you can buy. Within your DSA, you can target landing pages from standard ad groups. So essentially, this looks at the landing pages that are already being used within the other campaigns, and then focuses on them as your catch-all to make sure that you're getting every valuable keyword combination. In terms of different targeting methods, so as we mentioned there, the landing pages from your standard ad groups is the recommended, particularly when you're starting off, but there are other options available to you. So once you're comfortable with that, you can look to expand into categories and URL options. So the categories, just to note, your site needs to be crawlable, and from this, our SEO indexing will provide logically grouped category suggestions based on, for example, the products or services split out on your site. The URL is or URL contains basically just targets specific URLs or URL strings on your site. And we wouldn't recommend using this just on its own. And it can also be really valuable in terms of mining negative keywords for the rest of your campaigns. Some further advanced targeting options. So if you've been using DSA for a while and you're pretty comfortable with it, you can look at using page feeds. So you can set up page feeds to customize URL targeting, creatives, and bidding at scale. One point of note here is that this will need to be monitored and maintained. So just be aware before you're setting this up that that needs to happen. Secondly, you can look at using all web pages in combination with the URL is and URL contained. All web pages, as it kind of says on the tin, looks at all of the pages on your site, and then will use the DSA technology to basically crawl across that, and you can combine it with your URL is and URL contains. We wouldn't recommend using all web pages on its own unless you're very comfortable with the DSA tool and also are comfortable with the fact that it's going to go across your entire site. Finally, here's just a visual example of what this might look like if you're kind of planning out your campaigns. So essentially you have two targeting options in separate ad groups. On the left-hand side, so we have categories and then also URL is. So they are two separate ad groups within one campaign. But then we'd always recommend that you have your landing pages from standard ad groups as a separate catch-all campaign, just to make sure that you're kind of mopping up all of the queries. And just remember that 85 to 90% of search terms targeted by DSA are new and incremental search. So it's very important that you do have that catch-all set up. In terms of best practices, you always want to pair dynamic search ads with smart bidding. If you think of all of the possible combinations of keyword inputs that you're not currently targeting that people could be putting in and are relevant to your site, you're going to want to match a relevant bid with that. So it's important that you have smart bidding in place. You also want to make sure you have a set an unconstrained budget at the start. Basically, you want to make sure that you're in all potential auctions available to you for keywords coming to your site. And then finally, use the search terms report. So this is your go-to in terms of looking at performance, and also it allows you to figure out, one, is there keywords that people are coming to the site through that you don't want to be bidding on, so you can set them up as negatives throughout other campaigns. And also, is there keywords that are potentially having fantastic performance that you might want to set a standalone campaign for or add to one of your better performing campaigns. Finally, as part of the three-part series, we wanted to just kind of have a look back both on this particular part 3 and also the other elements. So first and foremost, your ads are as good as the assets you provide. Really do take time to sit down, make sure they're distinctive, creative, and that the assets are as good as you can make them, so that the performance is there. And then secondly, you want to embrace that shift in metrics mindset. So it is tough to kind of take a step back, and while you're not completely ignoring the CPCs, it's important to shift your outlook onto CPA and customer lifetime value as we go forward. And then finally, smart solutions are better together. Again, if you think of all of the possible combinations available, you want to have the power of Google's machine learning algorithms in the background helping you out as much as possible to make sure that you're there at the right time for the right customer. So last but not least, we want to say thank you very much for your time today, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day. Bye.